Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Thursday, May 9th edition of Dr. Pitt's Tips Live. I am licensed couple, marriage, and family therapist, Dr. Lauren Pitts Bounds. Welcome, 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 welcome. Hopefully, you all are having an amazing week. Not too much stress, not too much drama, not too much heartache, headache, or otherwise anything getting on all of your nerves at one time. So, welcome back. Have a powerful discussion lined up for you tonight. Hopefully, you'll be engaged and give me some questions and have this conversation with me. Tonight, we're going to talk about mental health awareness. As I'm sure many of you know, or all of you know, probably by now, that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So I really wanted to just take some time to really shed some serious light on the importance of mental health awareness. What is it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What is it all about? But before that, I gotta always do the housekeeping and get some legalities out the way. So I wanted to emphasize, as I do week in and week out, that the information that I share with you during my lives, on my webpage, during my podcast, any reels or otherwise recordings that may go up, is to provide you with information. I do refer to this as, a Thursday night free session, but the reality of it is that I'm not any of your therapist. I am not any of your life coach. At least I don't think so. Anyway, but for those of you who I do not work with directly, that I do not have a working relationship with, you have not signed any agreements or anything to be under my care, it is really important to note that the information that I'm sharing with you is just that, it's information. And what I want to encourage you to do is, if you find that the information that I'm sharing with you week in and week out is resonating with you, and any problem or situation or circumstance arises for you, I want you to share with your own practitioner, whether it be a medical practitioner or a mental health relation person, whatever the case may be, the information that you received, and give them an opportunity to help you to determine how you might be able to apply the information that you heard from me or learned from me during these lives. If you are having a medical or a mental health condition or emergency, please dial 911. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, you can dial 911 or you can dial 988, and there are people available for you to speak with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can speak with them privately. Your information is protected. So please don't feel like you're alone. Anybody that knows me knows that research is a very big deal to me, so I'm constantly researching and trying to find the most up-to-date relevant data to share with you when I'm presenting this information to you week in and week out. But it's okay to fact check. It is absolutely positively okay to fact check. I don't profess to be perfect. I don't profess to have all of the answers, and I wouldn't dare be simple enough to sit here and tell you that I never make mistakes, because I do. So I'm totally okay with you fact checking. I encourage you to do that for your own peace of mind, for the own sake of your information. So let's talk about mental health awareness and why it's so important. And what is it? When we're talking about mental health, what are we talking about? Because so oftentimes we hear words flying around. Well, you know they're crazy. You know they bipolar. You know something's wrong with them. They just sample. They just sample. But seriously though, when we are talking about your mental health, we are talking about your emotional, your psychological, and your social well-being. And it's important to understand that, because there's so many moving parts that go into each one of those things, because each of them, in one way, shape, form, or fashion, each of those things has the ability to impact how you think, feel, function, and navigate life. And if, as you think about what I'm saying, also understand that those states impact how you handle stress. It impacts how you relate to other people. It impacts your attachment style. It impacts the choices and the decisions that you make in life. So it's extremely important for you to understand the condition of your mental health. There are a number of factors that go into determining what state your mental health is in. You have biological factors such as genes and brain chemistry. And just to share a little funny with you, I remember one of my puberty conversations that I had with one of my aunts many years ago. And what she said, I'm going to give you the PG version, but what she said to me is, just because you may be intimate with someone doesn't mean that you should have children with them. Right? Now, I will tell you, growing up in a Christian home, of course, we were taught not to fornicate and all of that stuff. Yeah, that didn't listen. But anyway, the moral to the story is that in essence, what she was saying was genetics is a thing, and you have to be careful who you have children with, because who you have children with can definitely impact behavior and psychological functioning and social functioning, which impacts cognition and relationships and all of those things. The other thing to take into consideration that impacts mental health conditions is life experiences. You hear me talk week in and week out about trauma and the impact that trauma has on how you think, feel, function, and navigate life. That's why that term that you've been hearing for the past few years now, ACEs. ACEs stands for adverse childhood experiences. Well, what that suggests is that the adverse childhood experiences that we go through, some of which can actually be traumatic experiences, have the ability to impact how we think, feel, function, and navigate life. And as a result, it has the ability to impact our psychological functioning, our social functioning, and all of that impacts your mental health. Abuse has the ability, and depending on the magnitude of abuse, that falls under trauma too. But we look at trauma and we look at abuse at the same time, but also differently, again, depending on the magnitude and type of what's happening and when it happens. But it has the ability to impact your mental health. And then there's this word that I want you to remember: predisposition. There are some people that, because of the genetic component, because of the biological component, because of the brain chemistry, you have a family history of mental health problems, which means that dependent upon where you are in that family system, in other words, where are you hanging on the family tree in relation to the individuals that have mental health issues, you could very well be predisposed to having mental illness because someone close in your line has mental illness. So it's definitely something to be mindful of. And I just want to touch on that for a moment, because as you can imagine, in this line of work, when I'm doing intake, I'm conducting the intake session, one of the things that I ask is there a family history of diagnosed or undiagnosed mental illness? And the reason why I put that undiagnosed piece in there is because, again, we know that there is a stigma associated with mental illness. There's a stigma associated with mental health treatment. So not everybody is being diagnosed with mental illness, but we know that something is going on. There's something about how the person is behaving, how they're functioning in their day-to-day life, how they're relating to other people, how they're handling stress. There are behaviors that indicate to us that there is something going on that is compromising or in some way disrupting the health of the mind. So it's very important to note that. So, what are some mental health illnesses that we're hearing a lot about today? And I'm going to give you some statistics before the night is over, too. Um, I say this not in jest, because, of course, mental health awareness is very, very important. But I've said before on my lives and on my podcast that what I'm seeing and hearing a lot on social media, and just, being out and about in the community and in different conversations with family members, friends, and colleagues, is that mental health terminology is being thrown around like it's a frisbee. It's being thrown around like it's a baseball, right? It's almost like it's a fad to say, I have anxiety. It's almost like it's a fad to say, well, I'm depressed. And I heard something last night. I was in Bible study and I was just blown away with how one of our pastors that taught Bible study last night, and he explained it this way. He talked about mental health issues through the within the context of a relationship, meaning this. The way that he did the illustration was when you are anxious or when you are depressed or whatever it is that's going on. And let me just clarify, I'm going to put it in its infancy state. I'm going to put it in that place and space where you haven't even received a formal mental health diagnosis yet, right? You haven't received a diagnosis of an actual mental health condition. So the way that it was described was you end up creating this intimate relationship with the the preliminary characteristics, if you will, of that condition. And you're sort of having, I'm paraphrasing, you're sort of having this romantic interaction with your anxiety. You're having this romantic interaction with the depressive episodes. You're having this romantic interaction with angry outbursts, or you fill in the blanks, right? What were your symptoms at the low level before it got to the point where it may be considered out of control now and worthy of a formal diagnosis? And what he said was, when you look at relationships, right? Intimacy is a key ingredient of relationships. And if you're having this intimate relationship with the preliminary characteristics of mental illness, then it's hindering your ability. In his example, he was like, it's hindering your ability to have this healthy, loving relationship with God. What I want to add in for your consideration is, well, what does that look like in an earthly relationship? If you are anxious all the time, if you are depressed all the time, if you are angry all the time, if you are explosive all the time, if you are, manic one minute, depressed the next, if your emotions or if you're having difficulty regulating your emotions and you're constantly nurturing that. Because how many of you say, well, this is just the way I am. I got anger issues. And you talk about that all the time. Like you feed those maladaptive behaviors. Well, how's that impacting your relationships with other people? Are people walking on eggshells around you? Are people placating? In other words, they're doing anything and everything that they possibly can to keep the peace out of fear that you're going to flick off and cuss them out or stop speaking to them, or, it's going to become argumentative and combative and defensive and all of these things. You have to think about that because it's not just you. Mental health issues impact everybody that's in its vicinity in one way, shape, form, or fashion. Hence why some of you are apprehensive about interacting with certain people because what do we say? They're crazy. Something wrong with her. Something wrong with him. If you bringing him to the cookout, don't bring him to the cookout. He don't know how to act, especially when he get to drinking. These are the types of conversations that we have. But underneath the surface of those conversations is the hint that there may be a mental health issue going on. So we see issues with antisocial personality disorder, anxiety disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, bipolar disorder. That's one that gets thrown around a lot. Borderline personality disorder. That's one of the ones. Total confession, Dr. Pitts does not work with people who have a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. I don't do it. You have to know your lane. You have to know what populations you can be the most effective with. And every population isn't for everybody. So I have certain populations or certain mental health disorders that either A, are beyond my expertise, or B, I just choose to not work with that population. And that is my right as a mental health practitioner. We have a responsibility to do no harm, and I don't ever want to do anybody any harm by working with them and they have a diagnosed condition that is beyond my scope or skill set to work with, or I just don't want to. You can do that. Depression, eating disorders, PTSD, schizophrenia, seasonal affective disorder, self harm, suicide, and suicidal behavior. So I want you to think for a moment about, excuse me, cottonmouth. I want you to think for a moment about the signs and symptoms. I want you to think for a moment about yourself. And I'm not in any way trying to judge or criticize or anything like that. But I want you to do a self check for a moment. As I'm sharing with you the warning signs and symptoms that may be an indication that there's a mental health issue going on, I want you to be honest with yourself about whether or not something is going on that perhaps you could benefit from getting some help with. And then, if you find that the information that I'm getting ready to share is not applicable to you, is it applicable to someone that you love and care about? Is it applicable to your child? Is it applicable to a sibling or a parent or a coworker or a friend? Because again, mental health issues is not just about the person that's suffering from the symptoms. It has the ability to impact and potentially adversely affect all of those that are connected. So be mindful of that. So, some early warning signs and symptoms that I want to put on your radar. And be mindful as to whether or not you may just be experiencing one of these, or you may be experiencing more than one of these, or it may be situational. There's something happened, an event happened, the death of a loved one, or a traumatic event, or fill in the blank. Something happened, and since that situation happened, you realize that you've maybe been seeing some of these signs or symptoms going on in your own life or in the life of someone that you're connected to. Are you eating or sleeping too much or too little? That's a thing. And don't just look at it through the kind of, well, oh, Dr. Pitts, I work a lot of hours in the whole 9 yards. I get that. I get that. But then that's another conversation too, right? Because are you working to avoid dealing with some of the unpleasantries that are going on in your life? Or are you working because you legitimately have to work in order to be able to pay your bills, and that's why you're pulling overtime, or whatever the case may be? Because there are situations, and it's something that we screen for, is there are people who are overly involved in work or recreational activities, and they do that to avoid their problems. They do that to avoid dealing with the issues that are going on in their household or going on in their relationship. That's a negative coping skill. So it lends itself to opening up the door for you to have longer lasting, deeper issues over time. So it's real important, because these things can be subtle. They can sneak up on you, and they can present themselves in ways that you might not necessarily recognize as a mental health issue creeping up on you, that can morph on you and become more problematic over time. Do you find yourself pulling away from people and activities that used to bring you joy? In other words, do you find yourself being prone to isolating? Are you finding yourself in the place and space where, like, you know what, you just don't want to be bothered? I don't want to deal with folks. I don't want to go nowhere. I don't want to do nothing. I just want to curl up in a ball. That's an indication. That's an indication you withdrawing from the people and the things that you typically enjoyed and found pleasure in spending time with, or in those things that you were doing, that's an indication to you that something else may be going on that you may want to sort of sit with and get greater clarity on that, because you do not want these symptoms to morph on you and to become more problematic over time. Do you find yourself having low energy or no energy? Now, one of the things that I screen for when I'm working with clients is I always have to rule out things, right? So as I'm screening a client to try and get greater insight as to what it is that may be going on with them and what criteria they meet, so that I know whether or not I have to give a formal diagnosis, I have to look at, is the low or no energy connected to a medical condition, or is it a mental health issue, or is it a combination of both? I have to go through that screening process to get clarity on that. So don't make the assumption that if you have low energy or no energy, that that means that you have a mental health problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but you need to get clear on what the root of the issue is with your energy, so that you can better clarify, is it mental or is it physical? Do you feel numb or like nothing matters? And what I mean by that is, I have clients who say this all the time, right? You have so much that's going on in your life. Like it's like your tear ducts are empty. Dr. Pitts, I don't have any more tears to cry. I'm just, you know what, my affect is flat all the time. It's like, yeah, I can laugh, but I'm really just not feeling that joy and that peace and that fulfillment like deep down on the inside like I normally would. And I just feel numb. I just feel like, you know what? I don't have nothing else to give. I don't know how much more I can take. I'm not suggesting that you're thinking about suicide or anything like that, but you're just emotionally, you're just spent. That is an indication that if you don't address that, it can become more problematic in the long run and create a mental health challenge for you. Do you have unexplained aches and pains? You know, you've heard people say, I'm sure, that stress is the silent killer. Well, think about this. I lost my remote. Um, your thoughts and feelings are the remote control that determines the vibrational frequency that your mind operates on. So if you're having these thoughts and feelings that are like the blahs, eventually you'll start to feel that in your body. Your posture, maybe you're not sitting up as straight as you normally would, and you're just feeling defeated. Well, that mindset of defeat can contribute to your body feeling defeated. Remember this concept: everything in life is created twice. Well, Dr. Pitts, what do you mean by that? The first creation of something is a thought. Its second creation is when it manifests. So, let me simplify it for you further. Have you ever thought yourself into a headache, a stomach ache, a fever, diarrhea, constipation, crying? The human mind is silly putty. It's Play-Doh. It'll do whatever you tell it to do. So if you're obsessively thinking about, oh my gosh, my my throat hurts, like, I think I probably have COVID. You have the ability to talk yourself into and out of. That's why somatic conditions are in our diagnostic and statistical manual, because you can think yourself into sickness, just like you can think yourself in some ways out of how do I want to say this? You can think yourself out of some of the physical things that are going on in your body, because there is a connection between your thought life and your physical health. Are you smoking, drinking, or using drugs more than you normally would? In other words, are you self-medicating? I'm always just amazed when I hear people, whether it's clients or family members or friends or whatever the case may be, folk are talking, they're depressed, they're depressed, they're depressed, and they're drinking like fish. Well, it's like, you didn't know that alcohol was a depressant? So drinking yourself into oblivion is not going to help you feel happy. It's not going to help you feel better. And oh, by the way, it doesn't even medicate the problem that you're trying to drown, because you're not going to be drunk forever. You're not going to be high forever. And then when you come down off of your high, or when you sober up, guess what? The problem is still there. And chances are it's more intense than it was before you drank yourself silly or got high. So if you're finding an increase in your substance use or abuse, mental health challenge, opening the door for that. Do you find yourself feeling unusually confused, forgetful, on edge, angry, upset, worried, or scared? That is an indication for you that there may be something going on with your mental health. And it could be as simple as you're internalizing everything. You're not talking to a close friend. You're not talking to a close family member. You don't have a confidant. You're allowing your mind and your body to be a depository for all of the negativity, all of the toxicity, all of the adversity that's going on in your life. And you've convinced yourself that you can't talk to anybody, that you can't trust anybody, that nobody's going to understand. So you just carry it. You just carry it all around with you, and it's serving as emotional acid. It's eating you up from the inside out, and it's compromising your mental health. Here's a huge one. Are you yelling and fighting? Or as Dr. Pitt says, are you acting like a park ape with family members and friends? Are you on combust 24/7? Is your fuse short? Are you going from 0 to 100 in 1.3 seconds flat? Can't nobody say nothing to you without you ripping their whole face off? You screaming, yelling, hooting, howling, cussing, and fussing, and everybody is being hit by the shrapnel and the venom that's flying out your mouth? That's an indication to you that you're on mental health overload. Are you experiencing severe mood swings that are causing problems in your relationships? In other words, are people walking around on eggshells around you because they're afraid that you're going to flick off because you drank the last of the Kool-Aid? Or because you forgot to stop at the store and get ketchup? Or you forgot to tell them that you use the card at the grocery store? Fill in the blank. People argue, fuss, and fight over the most trivial things and over the biggest things. But if you're happy one minute and going left over everything and nothing the next, that's an indication to you that you're on overload, and you want to take a look at that. Are you having persistent thoughts and memories you can't get out of your head? In other words, are you having these recurring memories about, it could be somebody who passed away, it could be the loss of a job, it could be a relationship that went south, it could be somebody that's wronged you. If you find yourself just sort of like obsessively thinking about this negative situation or circumstance or person, and you can't shake it, it's like people say to me, Dr. Pitts, I just can't get it out of my head. I can't get it out of my head. That's something that we need to work on, because whatever it is that transpired shouldn't be playing over and over and over in your head like a broken record. Are you thinking about harming yourself or others? That is definitely, you talk about red flags and bells and whistles screaming. All of the other things that I've said thus far are extremely important, and you need to pay attention to them, and you need to be aware of them. But when we get over into the lane of you're thinking about doing harm to yourself and others, we've now escalated to a whole nother level. See, as a mandated reporter, I have a responsibility, to protect your personal health information, your PHI. And I have a responsibility to comply with HIPAA, meaning keeping your personal health information safe and secure. Legally, I have a right to violate HIPAA if it becomes apparent to me that someone has become a threat to themselves, a threat to others, or if I'm made aware that a member of a vulnerable population is being abused. So if you are considering harming yourself or others, getting help is imperative. It is absolutely imperative. Do you find yourself having difficulty performing daily tasks like taking proper care of your children, getting out of bed, maintaining your personal hygiene, going to work or going to school? These are indications that something is going on and you need to take a look at it. So, with your permission, I want to share with you some statistics, and I'm going to do that throughout the remaining 30 minutes as I'm touching on each topic, because I think a big part of why the stigma is what it is, particularly in Black and brown communities, is because I don't think that we have been taught to take mental health seriously. Um, I would imagine that each of you that have tuned in tonight can probably think of at least one person in your family or amongst your friends or even in your community that has suffered from mental illness, and people know that they have suffered from mental illness, but nobody's really talking about it. It's almost like that dirty little secret that people were sweeping under the rug and acting like it didn't happen, when in actuality, it's going on and it's a real thing, and it's just like anything else. We cannot heal what we don't acknowledge as a problem. We have to be able to acknowledge it so that we can confront it and then appropriately address it so that we can achieve the resolve that's in the best interest of all of those involved. So when you look at mental health statistics, I can't emphasize enough that mental health care matters. I pulled my stats from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And the first thing that I want to share with you is that the average delay between symptom onset and treatment is 11 years. You know how much damage can be done in 11 years? Just imagine, I'm gonna put this in a more serious context, because I actually think that people take cancer more seriously than they take mental illness. Just imagine if you or someone that you loved and cared about were told that you have cancer and you have stage 1. You have stage 1 of whatever type of cancer. And because we caught it early with the appropriate treatment, your chances of survival are like 99.9%. And you're like, okay. And you leave the doctor's office and you go home. And for 11 years, you act like you didn't receive a cancer diagnosis. And by the time you go back for another office visit, you're spitting up blood. You can barely move. You literally feel like you're dying. And it's because you are. And when you go in to see the doctor, they tell you, I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's absolutely nothing that we can do. The cancer has ravaged your entire body, and there's nothing we can do. That's what it's like to have the onset of mental illness symptoms and to not get treatment. Adults with mental health diagnosis who received treatment or counseling in the past year, 25% were Asian, 36% were Hispanic or Latino, 39% were Black, 52% were white, 52% were multiracial, and 56% were members of the LGBTQ community. People who get treatment in a given year: 47% of adults with mental illness, 65% of adults with serious mental illness, and 51% of youth aged 6 to 17 with a mental health condition. So, do the math. That still suggests that half of the people with mental illness don't get appropriate care. If you don't treat it, it doesn't just miraculously go away. It continues to get worse. So what are you doing about it? One of the things associated with the stigma of mental health issues is that people think that if you have an onset of a symptom or if something happens that causes you to be impacted in how you think, feel, function, and navigate life, people have this cognitive distortion that, oh, well, people are going to think I'm crazy. No. Mental health issues doesn't mean that you're crazy. It means that things have happened that have impacted your functioning, but that doesn't mean that you're crazy. And we throw crazy around sort of carelessly and almost insensitively, but having difficulties managing the stressors of life doesn't mean you're crazy. But one thing sure and certain, if you don't get appropriate help, you may not end up crazy, but you can certainly end up with a level of mental instability that may present to others like you're insane. But that can certainly be avoided. And you're not alone. 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness. 1 in 5. 1 in 5. Do the math. For each of your friends, each of your family members, for every 5 people, pull out one, pull out one, pull out one, pull out one, pull out one. That's a lot of people in our lives that are struggling with mental illness. 1 in 20 U.S. adults experience serious mental illness, and 17% of youth ages 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 17% of youth ages 6 to 17 years of age experience a mental health disorder. You're like, Dr. Pitt's 6 years old? Yeah. I told y'all why I don't work with kids anymore. I've heard and seen some things that would make some of you want to throw yourself off the front step with some of the things these children have been exposed to. One of the things that we have to be mindful of, and what's so crazy, I'm looking at a stat from NAMI, and it's broken down the United States into geographic regions, and it almost looks like the time zones slightly. So when you look at, if you were to look at the U.S. map from the Mississippi River east, i.e. the eastern time zone, 19% of the population is dealing with anxiety disorders in the east. 8% is the next area over that goes over to like right past Minnesota. That's depression. And then there's a high percentage of co-occurring substance use disorders and mental illness in the Midwest, which is, interestingly enough, where a huge part of the U.S. population of Native Americans are. And then as you're getting over to the West Coast, you have schizophrenia, PTSD, bipolar, borderline, and obsessive compulsive disorder. I would encourage you to, again, it's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, to go on there and peruse the website and familiarize yourself with some of these statistics. You can also go to SAMHSA.gov, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They're a part of the Federal Department of Health and Human Services website, and they handle a lot of mental health stuff. But there's a wealth of information on there that can be really, really, really instrumental in helping you to educate and empower yourself regarding mental health, mental illness, treatment, care, how to be supportive if you have a family member or friend or colleague that you believe is suffering from mental illness. It's not something that it's not something that you want to take lightly. It's not something that you want to continue to ignore, because there's a ripple effect. There's a ripple effect to mental illness that has the ability to impact our homes, our families, our communities, our finances, our safety. Just think for a moment about the mass shootings that have become so prevalent in our country. Can you think of one? Can you think of one mass shooting that has occurred in this country where, when they got the person's history, because they don't always get the person in custody, because a lot of them end up dead, but when the media started reporting on the history of the person, a lot of times there's a history of untreated mental illness that has come into play. And then people, of course, want to argue about gun rights and the whole nine yards. And I'm like, what I don't understand is how am I robbing you of your gun rights if you can have a gun if you're sane enough to carry it? What is wrong? You got to go through a criminal background check and psych eval to be a cop. You got to go through a criminal background check and a psych eval to be in the U.S. military. You've got to go through a criminal background check to be a therapist, to be an educator, and a wealth of other positions in this country. You have to do psych evals and criminal background checks. But to yield a weapon in this country, you don't have to do a psych eval. But yet the statistics continue to show us that mental illness is connected to mass shootings and a lot of the violence that we see going on in the country. And it also ties into substance use, because 34% of US adults with mental illness also have a substance use disorder. We call that a co-occurring disorder. So you have two things. You've got mental illness and you have substance use going on. And oftentimes it's very, very difficult to differentiate what came first. The chicken or the egg is what we say, right? Because you have mental illness that there are, and it can appear in different ways, but you have some individuals that are mentally ill and they'll start to self-medicate to try to calm down or hide the symptoms of their mental illness. You have some people who are mentally ill, they're on medication, they don't like the way that the medication makes them feel, so they drink or get high trying to better manage the mental health symptoms that they have. And then you have some drugs and alcohol that can impact your mental health. So you see it's almost cyclical, right? Where it really, depending on the severity and how long it's been going on and what the drug of choice is and how much alcohol consumption, if that's applicable, it's hard to tell. Were they mentally ill first and then started using drugs and or alcohol, or were they using drugs and alcohol first and mental illness was, came as a result? In the family, caregivers spend an average of 32 hours per week providing unpaid care. In the community, depressive disorders are the number one cause of hospitalization for people aged 18 or younger, after excluding those related to pregnancy and birth. And psychosis spectrum and mood disorders lead to nearly 600,000 hospitalizations per year for people aged 18 to 44. So, what do? Dr. Pitts, what do we do if someone that we love and care about, or someone that we observe, if we're in a field where we're working with other people, you're in a supervisor capacity, or you see a colleague, you bear witness to someone appears to be struggling in their mental health. What do? First, gently, respectfully, compassionately, a simple, "Are you okay? You seem a little stressed. Something bothering you that you want to talk about? I'm here. If You need to talk. You can listen. Let the person know that the door is open and that you're willing to be a safe space for them to speak openly and honestly about whatever it is that they may be going through. And it's not necessary, pardon me, for you to solve the problem for them, but what you do want to do is you want to listen, actively listen. You want to actively listen and let the person complete their own thoughts and sentences without interrupting them so that you can get as much insight as you possibly can as to what's going on with them. And then, if you so choose, you may want to encourage them to get help, or you may offer, X, Y, or Z suggestion. You want to let them know that you understand. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily that you understand the depths of what's going on with them psychologically, but I mean let them know that you understand from an empathetic perspective. This person is bearing their heart and soul to you and being vulnerable and transparent. That's a great time for you to convey to them that they're not alone. Make sure that you're emotionally available and you stay present in the conversation so that they know that what they said mattered. You don't ever want to be that person that brushes somebody off and makes them feel dismissed or devalued, because that can only serve to exacerbate the symptoms and the experiences that they're having. You want to avoid being judgmental. I think one of the biggest issues that people have when it comes to being a support system for someone who's suffering from mental illness is that you have to be careful to not make light of what they've shared with you. You have to be careful to not tell them that they're being silly and that they just need pause, skirt, rewind. Somebody is bearing their heart and soul to you about the fact that they're struggling with their mental health. Your default answer should not just be, oh baby, just pray about it. I can tell you, as someone who has experienced an exorbitant amount of trauma, that there have been times in my life where the pain was cutting so deep emotionally that not only was I having difficulty thinking straight, I felt like, and this is the term that I use, I felt like I was a spiritual deaf mute. And what I meant by that was I was in such intense emotional pain that I couldn't even find the words to pray. I was just a mess. I couldn't find the words to pray. I didn't feel like I could hear God. I just was in this hopeless and helpless state that had me questioning, is this it? Am I going to survive this? And you have to be empathetic. You have to be willing to not be judgmental, to not be critical, and to take people seriously. You do not want to minimize what they're going through, because, and here's the thing, I want you to get this. Their pain is real to them. Just because you could brush it off as nothing, just because it doesn't faze you, doesn't mean that it doesn't faze somebody else. Everybody's not built the same. Everybody doesn't have the same level of resilience. Some people aren't resilient at all. Everybody doesn't have the level of strength that you have. Some people aren't strong at all. So you have to be mindful that you can't be judgmental, you can't be critical, you have to take those seriously, and without getting over into enabling, you want to make yourself available for that person to speak with you again. You want to encourage them. You must encourage them to get help because you don't want to become their therapist. You don't want to become their dumping ground for all of their problems. You want to make sure that you're encouraging them to get appropriate help to navigate their problems properly. If somebody is talking to you in confidence, you don't want to turn what they've told you into gossip. You don't want to put their business in the street and sort of make a spectacle out of one of the most vulnerable places and spaces that they may ever be in their life. You want to make sure that you are meeting the person in a place of common humanity with an open mind and an open heart. There but the grace of God go I. In other words, keep living. The day may come when you feel what they're feeling. I want to touch on suicide, and then I'm going to give you some self-care tips, and then I gotta go because I got a session. What I'm about to say to you might seem strange, but it's real. It's okay to talk about suicide. And I don't mean talk about suicide in a way that glorifies it. I mean, it's okay to talk about suicide and calmly, respectfully acknowledge that suicide is not the answer. Suicide is a permanent solution to temporary problems. And thoughts of suicide can be frightening, but reaching out for help and checking in with family members and friends can be instrumental in avoiding devastating outcomes. Did you know that suicide is the leading cause of death in the U.S.? It's second among people aged 10 to 14. So kids aged 10 to 14, the second leading cause of death for them is suicide. It's the third leading cause of death for individuals aged 15 to 24, and 12th overall. Among those who die by suicide, 46% have a diagnosed mental health condition. 90% have experienced symptoms of mental health conditions. I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to give you some tips because I cannot emphasize this enough. One of the things that we're seeing in our society today is a significant increase in advocacy and the vocalization of challenges that the LGBTQ community is facing. The LGBT community, particularly LGBTQ youth, have a 45% risk for serious thoughts of suicide. They are one of the most vulnerable population when it comes to suicide. So if you have a child, a family member, a friend, a member of your community, a student, a niece, and it doesn't matter. You need to know that they are the most vulnerable population for risk when it comes to suicide. High school students is second at 22%, and young adults age 18 to 25 are at 13%. You got to pay attention, folks. You have to pay attention. Um, your self-care is extremely important to strengthening and healing your mental health. You have to take care of yourself. You have to know that you matter. And because you matter, it's important for you to spend time and energy doing appropriate things to help yourself feel better and get better. In other words, you have to engage in behaviors, activities, connections that are instrumental in building you up to be a stronger, healthier, better you. You have to learn how to be nice to yourself. You have to learn how to be loving to yourself. You have to learn how to accept yourself and see your value and your worth. You have to learn how to be patient with yourself. I'm so sick and tired of hearing the word perfectionist I could spit. Nobody is perfect. You're driving yourself crazy trying to be perfect. Stop it. You're allowed to make mistakes. Making mistakes is how we learn and grow. If you're perfect, first of all, you're boring because all the rest of us are flawed. But if you're perfect, you've ceased growing, so you're stagnant. You're not perfect. Be patient with yourself and accept the fact that because you are human, because you are flawed like all the rest of us, you are going to make mistakes. And you can't please everybody. So that people pleasing stuff, put it to rest. Invest in yourself. Follow your dreams. Study things that interest you. You got to recognize when your problems are over your head. You can't be everybody's superhero. You can't take care of everything and everybody else and not take care of you. You better move yourself up that list. Because, look, and you've heard people say this before, right? Folk will run you in the ground, will cry over your grave, and move right on. You'll be dead and gone to an early grave, and they're going to move on to the next person or people. It's like locusts. You've got to take care of yourself. You have to make yourself a priority. And you got to learn when to say no to situations or people that you know are not healthy for you. You don't have to be a victim. You can learn from the mistakes of your past so that you're not repeating the same pattern. And where some of the traumatic events, if not all of the traumatic events that you've been through in life, you can choose to not stay victim. You can choose to use those things that have happened as stepping stones to a stronger, healthier, better you. You don't have to continue to be the victim of your circumstances. Stop living life in the rearview mirror. Focus forward. Where are you going? We know where you've been. Where are you going? Don't you want to experience more and different and better for your life? You get to choose. So start. And then learn what the meaning of true resilience is. Practicing healthy coping skills, taking care of yourself emotionally, being thankful and grateful, recognizing the victories in your life, improving your self-esteem, challenging yourself to be a stronger, healthier, and better you. That's all I got. I hope that in this past 57 minutes, you have grown more aware of the importance of mental health awareness, mental health care. And my prayer for you, my wish for you, my hope for you, my desire for you is that you learn to love yourself enough to make your mental health, your mental wellness a priority, because you are worth it. That's all I got. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.